Okay, so I'm going to show you how to draw a little boat on the shore and begin to put the colour around it using flat and graduated washes. And I've drawn around this boat in felt tip. I've drawn a rectangle around this little boat because the first thing that you're going to want to do is to try to get the shape of the boat a little bit accurate. And one way of doing it is, if you've got a viewfinder, which is 2 bits of card, L-shaped bits of card, you can place it around the boat and really see how the shape of the boat fits into a rectangle or a square or whatever it might be. So the points of the boat are all touching the rectangle. And that leaves shapes around it, which are, in this case, water and beach. So it's those shapes that really help us to see the shape of the boat. That's why I've drawn that rectangle. So when I start to draw the boat, I have in my, either in my mind's eye, or if I'm working from a photo, I can do this kind of thing. If I'm working from life, I can use my viewfinder and hold it up and look at the boat through that and see what its angle is from the horizontal or vertical, and you know how that might be interpreted. So the highest point is this point here, the most sort of easterly point here. That's leaving me a very thin wedge, which occupies only a small amount of this whole surface. And I could, using my thumb as a slide rule, even count 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can use proportion to help me to deduce how much of the space is taken up each side. So that's what I'm kind of doing. This rectangle is actually the rectangle of the whole painting. So within that, I'm going to place the boat, and I'm looking at that angle. I'm thinking, okay, here's my horizontal. I'll put it in a little bit more heavily so you can pick it up on the camera. And then here a vertical, maybe another one about here. I'm looking at this gap and this gap, this gap and this gap to try to place my boat a little bit. Somewhere here. And the proportion, I can get that proportion of that rectangle quite easily by taking this point here to this point here and along. It's 2 and a half, just under. So let's just check that I've got that more or less right. 1, 2 and a half, just over. So I need to bring that back a little bit to about there, something like that. Check again. 1, 2. That's better. Okay. So that's my projected rectangle, and so I can, looking at this little wedge, I can draw a similar little wedge. Then this is very nice, sort of slightly curved shape here, this boat here, but this big triangle is telling me a lot about the angle of the boat and where it hits this point on the left here. So even if I draw a straight line to start with, then I can play around with it and start to see the subtle curves that I might need to add. Okay, so something like that. Then here I've got a little angle which comes down to where the boat hits, enters the water here. So, and it's a similar shape to that really. And so something like that. And then it comes down and joins this point here in a very slow curve, like a kind of, yeah, it's not quite even. It flattens out a little bit here, and it just curves and bellies a little bit. So even again, if I draw a straight line, and then I can even check the way it's not straight by if I get a straight edge, that line at the bottom of the boat there is bending out from a straight line quite a bit. So I can see that quite easily, and then I can add that into my boat shape like that. So that's the overall boat profile. And then it's a question of kind of filling in a little bit in the interior. But we've got enough to start on the washes. So I'm just going to rub out these construction lines that I did a little bit more heavily because I wanted you to be able to see them. So, okay, so this boat is lying on the edge of the water. So the water's very, very shallow here. We've got wet sand coming down, and there are almost lovely lines of wetness. So I don't have to worry about the wash being totally flat. And then it merges into this sort of lovely sort of turquoisey, subtle turquoise colour with a little bit of sand colour in it. So we're going to do just the graduated wash to start with, and then when it's dry or nearly dry or as it's drying, just add some little touches. And I may not get around to doing those in the demo because that will involve waiting for some time for it to dry, just to that point where it's just damp. But let's do the wet and wet wash and see how we go. So, okay, so I've got some colours mixed. In fact, I think I need to make a little bit more of my sea colour. For the sea colour, I've used cyanide turquoise, and I've added a little tiny touch of alizarin crimson just to dull it and soften it a little bit. I'm adding some water, and I'm going to add some more pigment as well to that. When you see pigment mixed in a pool like this, in a palette, it looks so dark, but actually when you get it down on the paper, I'm just adding alizarin crimson here just to mute it a little, it's a lot lighter. So it's always good to have a little test, run a little test of the colour, and see what it's like that. Okay, so I think hopefully that's enough colour. Raw sienna and a little burnt sienna to just pink it up a bit, and a little touch of ultramarine blue just to, again, mute it a little. So it's a sort of a wet sand colour. Okay, so I've got choices. I can do it all wet on dry, or I can do it wet on damp, or somewhere in between. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the surface. Maybe I'm going to angle this a little bit. Just which side to angle it on. This little box might do. And maybe something else. It's just about 20-25 degrees. Yep, that's good. And I'm going to just wet the surface. Nice big brush. This is a number 16 round. I'm wetting it with full brush loads, and I'm going to go around the boat. So you probably can't see this water on the screen, but you'll have to take my word for it that moisture is going down. And I'm being careful to cover all the parts of the paper that I want to cover with my wash in a minute. Right. Okay, I'm going to check that now, get some shine on it and see. Yeah, it's more or less covered. It's a bit at the top of it actually. And a little bit there. Right, so it's shiny. Yeah, there we go. It's shiny all over now. So, and that water is flowing down slowly. It's percolating down to the bottom of the picture space. So it's drying more quickly at the top. Now, what I don't want to do is dilute my paint anymore, so I'm taking the moisture off my brush a little bit. And I'm going to start with the raw sienna mix at the top of the picture. I'm going to angle it down if I can. I'm going to then add the second colour. So I'm going to start with this. Across the top. And the marks of the beach are at an angle, so I'm just high water marks coming down, just as a slight angle. So if I make my brush marks do that, then I might catch some of that sense of the angled beach. Okay, so now I'm going to dip into this colour. I'm going to add some of this. I'm going to leave a gap for now. I'm going to move on here. Now I've got less on my brush, I'm going to come up here and just mix that. Let it cool down a little bit. Keep the thing flowing down. And then I'm going to just clean my brush a little bit, dry it off a bit. And I'm coming back to this sand colour, and with not too much on the brush, I'm going to add a little bit more pigment. Like that. And I'm going to play a little bit along this edge. I'm doing this with hardly any pigment on the brush. It's being wiped off a lot, like that. And it's drier at the top than at the bottom, so I can play a little bit with what's going on here. I'm mixing some of the blue with it. So I'll just get some colour combining there. Wiping it off again, so I'm not getting too much water on the painting. And I'm dipping my brush into the fallow and into the raw burnt sienna to make a combined mix. And I'm going to take that's very stiff paint and hardly any water. I'm just going to experiment with getting a little bit of shadow under the boat with this. The paint is still wet, still quite damp, not flowing a lot now here, so it's starting to dry off a little bit, and I can start to just get a little bit of a sense of movement under the boat with that wash. Now I'm keeping an eye on everything, washing my brush out, and I've noticed that there's a gathering at the bottom of my picture space, so I'm just taking the excess off my brush, and I'm using my brush tip to hoover up the excess water that's gathering there at the bottom of the picture. If you don't do that, you'll get a back run. So it's worth keeping an eye on that as it's drying. It's probably best to keep this at an angle to dry, which means it will dry at the top first. It's already starting to dry up here, and it'll dry slower down here, which means it'll still carry on percolating, and it may be necessary to do this more than once. And then as it dries, it's still very shiny all over, but waiting maybe 5 minutes, maybe a few less than that, it depends on the atmospheric conditions of your house, your room. When it's just not shiny anymore, but gone dull, but it's still damp, would be a good time to start playing around with putting little ripples in. And if you choose that time, the little ripples will just be very slightly softened by the moisture in the paper. And then again, if you want the marks to be crisper, you can wait till it's completely dry and put little ripples down, wet on dry. So you can do both of those or either, and it's quite nice to play with that whole thing. And then if you want to add more texture up here, I would wait until this wash is completely dry before you start to touch that. If you start to touch anything up here now, you'll probably be lifting off colour or doing something which is hard to control and anticipate. So do this as a first stage, and then, you know, assess the situation and say, look, this is a bit like cricket, it's time to wait now and wait to see what happens in, you know, whatever, 10 minutes time or 20 minutes time. Be prepared to be patient and act when the moment is right. So I'm going to leave my demo there as a way of showing you how to begin on a painting of a little boat on the water.